Hi everyone, my name is Nuno from Sound Particles, and it's a pleasure to be here today to present our recent plugin called AudioMatrix. Plugins comes in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes it's a plugin that creates wonderful sound, and some other times it's simply a tool that you use to save time or to open a new world of possibilities. And AudioMatrix is just like that. So it doesn't matter if you work in stereo, in surround or immersive. Something like AudioMatrix that allows you to reroute inputs and outputs can actually be a fantastic tool for you to use to save time, increase your productivity, and even open new things and new possibilities that were not possible before. It's a simple plugin, but with the full potential, so let's take a look. So this is AudioMatrix. As you can see, you have these inputs over here, the outputs, and then you put the connections. You say, okay, I want this input to go there, this go there, and you can route all of those things. So for instance, imagine that I have this completely unlinked, and now I say, okay, I want left to go to the left, and I want right to go to the right, but I don't want center to go anywhere. So you can start putting all of the connections in here. Most of the times you simply want these 0 dB connections, which means that you want the audio to not change its gain. Sometimes you may want to say, okay, now I want something but with -3 dBs, and you make a connection and say, no, it's -3, do the connection but with a different gain, -6 sometimes, or if you want you can create even a custom configuration and simply put a knob there, and then you simply use this to drag and drop and be able to control exactly how much gain do you want to this kind of connection. Also, there is some situations where you want to reverse the polarity of a signal. For instance, imagine the LFE, for some reason you want to do something. So you can come here and simply change the polarity of certain signals for doing particular things like we're going to see, like middle side and many other applications. Also, as you can see, we have the meters here, the master gain over there. There is the zoom if you want to put this at a different zoom depending on the better for you to better adapt to your screen. And also, if you are looking for happy accidents, like most of our plugins, you have the dice here, the random preset that pretty much create the random things that, who knows, may create something quite interesting or not. Presets, inputs, outputs, all of those things over here. But now let's look at some use cases to really dive into this, because AudioMatrix, it's great, it supports up to 64 inputs and outputs. So let's see some applications of this. So one of the use cases that you can do with AudioMatrix, it's actually mirror things, flip left and right. So yes, instead of left going to left and right going to right, eventually you want to flip things around and say, no, I want the left to actually come to right and vice versa. And this could be interesting because sometimes you have a stereo or a 5.1 recording that eventually the sound happens more in one side of the soundscape, but actually you are using this on a video that asks for that to happen more on the other side. Or for instance, in here it's a stereo, but now imagine that is a 5.1 or a Dolby Atmos or whatever. You say, okay, left is swapping with right, center and LFE stays the same, but then let's also swap the surround. So you can do this even with Dolby Atmos bed, you can flip things around. Also, sometimes you simply want to shift all the channels around. Imagine that you want, okay, I want the left to actually go to the center goes to the right to the right surround. So you can also easily make these kind of transformations using AudioMatrix. So another situation where AudioMatrix can be quite handy is middle side. So sometimes you want to convert middle side to stereo, stereo to middle side. For instance, imagine that you are recording something in stereo using mid-side technique. So you have a cardioid facing to the front and a figure of 8 to the side, but then you cannot use these signals directly as a stereo. You need to convert from middle side to left and right. So you can easily do something like that on AudioMatrix. So for instance, you say, okay, I want the left to be the mix of these two signals from the cardioid and the figure of 8, and then the right to be the same thing, but now with the polarity of the figure of 8 inverted. And by doing this, you are converting mid-side to left and right. Also, sometimes you want to convert from stereo to mid-side and back to stereo. For instance, one application typically it's on mastering. Sometimes you are doing something, do the final touch on a mix. Imagine that you feel the need to equalize slightly the voice, but at this point you don't longer have the individual tracks, just the final mix. And instead of equalizing everything, a technique that sometimes mastering engineers do is to convert from left and right to middle side, then apply equalization only to the mid signal, which means that it's going to affect only the things that are on the center, and then convert back to left and right. And by doing this, you are able to control and do things only to the mid. So with middle side and conversions to stereo and back to middle side is something that AudioMatrix can actually help you with. So let's talk about mono, because sometimes, yes, we need to create mono versions of things. Of course, you can use typical tools to do those things. With AudioMatrix, you can help you a little more because it allows you to personalize how much you want the contribution of each channel. So, of course, you could come here and say, let's put the output as both left and right. But imagine that you say, no, I want this, but I want the right to have a slightly higher contribution to the final mono version. So you can, if you want, you can even place here some knobs and say, okay, how much do you want each channel to contribute to this mono version? And of course, this applies to a mono output. Imagine that you have something like a 5.1 and you want to do the exact same things, or sometimes what happens is that you simply want this big mono kind of sound. And by doing that, you could come here and simply say, okay, let's have all of this over here, and pretty much making sure that all the signals go everywhere. So it's a big and it is mono, all channels playing the exact same thing at once, but it's mono. So that's why we usually call this big mono. Another situation that could be interesting is speaker arrays. So, for instance, imagine that you are on a studio, you have a 7.1 studio, but actually you are working on a 5.1 project or working with 5.1 files. Usually what happens is something like this, as you see on the screen. So pretty much you have left, right, center, LFE, and then the left surround goes only to the side surround, and nothing actually goes to the rear surround. And this is fine, but the problem is that the image the final mix is going to be quite tending to the front because you miss having speakers on the back. So eventually you could say, okay, let's use a AudioMatrix and add something like this. So what happens now is that all the signal from left surround actually goes for both rear and side, and right surround go both for the sides and rear surround. Nonetheless, if you do only like this, the levels will be completely off because actually you are now the signal, instead of being reproduced by one speaker, is being reproduced by two speakers. So let's simply come here and put this with -3 dBs, and then with this you get the right levels. You get an array of speakers, almost like a real movie theater where you have this array of speakers on the sides and on the back. So with this you take advantage of using your 7.1 studio working with 5.1. Also, sometimes when you are working with something like Dolby Atmos bed or something like that, sometimes what happens is that you need to fine-tune something that actually happens on the rear or on the ceilings or something like that. And it's a little awkward if you have already done that, a little awkward to try to equalize something that is on the back and you are constantly moving your head and something like that. So one of the interesting things that you can do is actually, at these situations, bring all the signals to the center, fine-tune the sounds, and then put them back on the previous position. So how can I do that? Well, imagine I come here, I'm going to clear all of this, and now let's put everything here going to the center. So at this moment, all inputs are going to be mixed coming to the center. Okay, if I have a bed that at some point only has something happening the back, on the sides, or the ceiling, pretty much is going to the center. I'm going to fine tune everything as I want, and then it bypass and get everything as it should. Sometimes you want to make some changes on the LFE. For instance, imagine that you want to remove the LFE signal, or if you want to make some fine tunings on the LFE. So you can simply come here, simply disable the LFE, or eventually adding a custom value to the gain, and then you can control this, or even automate this parameter to make sure that LFE sometimes is completely off, and then you simply start adding more LFE, or even increase the gain of the LFE for some reason. So if you want to control LFE, this could be a good application for that. Sometimes, especially with home studios, people have a 5.1 system with 5 speakers and 1 subwoofer, but they don't have a bass management, which means that pretty much only the LFE gets reproduced by the subwoofer, and you should also have a lot of frequencies there on the left, right, and center, and other on surrounds that you should also be reproduced by the subwoofer. What you can do is, okay, there is a quick and dirty way of doing things. It's simply say, no, I want to send every single channel also to the subwoofer by doing something like this. You come here, you simply say that, okay, yes, left, right, centers, left surrounds, right surrounds, go to the corresponding channel, but also everything else goes to the LFE. Imagine that LFE should stay with 0 dB, everything else should have minus 3 dB, for instance, over there. And with this situation, now anything that comes from the left channel is also reproduced by the subwoofer. And like I mentioned, it could be a dirty but quick way of sending things, but also not only with surround, even with stereo. So imagine that you are having something in stereo, okay, and then you want to take advantage of the LFE also for stereo, and you say, okay, let's have left going to left, right to right, but then also make sure that the LFE receives the signal from these main channels. So one of the typical uses for AudioMatrix is to do quick down mixes and up mixing. So for instance, imagine that you have this sound in 5.1, okay, and then you want to create a stereo version of it. So you send left to left, right to right, probably the center you send with minus 3 dBs to both channels. Imagine that you say, okay, now I don't want the LFE in this down mix, and then you probably say, okay, let's put left surround and right surround also on the left, on the right side, but let's put a knob here and for me to fine tune things, because imagine that this 5.1, the surrounds brings too much reverb or too much ambient sound, and you simply want to control, because you are an artist and you want to make sure that each channel gives the right contribution to this mixing. Also, sometimes what you don't want to do is not down mixing, but up mixing. So imagine that you have this 5.1, but actually you are working on a 7.1.2, so you want to up mix things. So once again, you will do the same thing that we just talked about speaker arrays. So the left surround now goes to the side and the rear. The same thing with the right surround, okay? And then you say, okay, what do I want here on the ceiling speakers? So eventually you say, no, I want to give some contribution from the left and right on the front, or you want something coming from the surrounds, or both, or whatever. So you simply come here and said, okay, let's also have a little of surround over there, and you fine-tune this for the right amount that you think that makes sense to have in this scenario. So up mixing, down mixing, something that is a no-brainer for AudioMatrix. So sometimes you are working with 5.1 and you get different assets. Some are in SMPTE format, some are 5.1 in field format, and you may have the need because some audio files are not being interpreted as they should by your digital audio workstation. So you can simply use AudioMatrix to change the order of things. So for instance, imagine that you say, okay, left goes to the left, right, but the second channel is actually center, it's not right, so let's put this on the center channel. Then we have the right signal over there, then the fourth, it's actually the left surround, the right surround, and the final one is LFE, and then you simply reroute channels to the right order for you to continue working as you should with your plugins and everything else, because now the ordering of the channels are now fixed. Sometimes what you want is simply some flexibility to allow you to mute some channels or eventually change their levels independently. For instance, you have a 5.1, but actually you don't want surround being played, you simply want the frontal image to be used. Or imagine that, yes, you have surrounds, but once again, they have too much reverb, too much ambient sound, and then you simply want to come here and be able to fine-tune things or even automate them, and by doing this you control only the signal of each one of those channels independently, and by doing this you get much more flexibility, making sure that you are using the right sounds with the right amount of each channel. Now I hope that you have a better understanding of what kind of things that AudioMatrix is able to do. As always, you can download the trial from our website and check it yourself. And also, don't hesitate to send us your feedback. We love to get feedback from our users about new features that you would like, or improvements, or things like that. Once again, like I mentioned, it's not about having a plugin that creates this magical, fantastic sound. No, it's a utility plugin. It's going to save you a lot of time, also opens a lot of possibilities for things in terms of creativity with these crazy reroutings that you are able to do. And even myself, every single day I come up with new applications for this kind of plugin, and I really hope that you find it as useful as we have been finding it. And stay tuned, because there is a lot of additional products coming until the end of the year, so see you around.